Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. I wanted to start by just showing you the last 24 hours or so, looking here at infrared temperatures measured by GOES 16. Two systems that moved across the country really decoupled, as we talked about in Monday's video here, with the first one pulling through the northeast, as you can see here, and the second system dropping through the central plains. Now this is what of course gave us our rainmaker initially, and then the snow on the back side of this, which right now is pushing through the Ohio Valley. But I want to pause this and show you something really spectacular. If you notice, this is the manifestation of the subtropical jet stream right in through here. We've had a very strong subtropical jet stream throughout this, well, almost the second two-thirds of winter. But if you notice right here, there's a very sharp edge to the back side of this. And we were kind of watching this on satellite, and then a few people started tweeting some pictures from Louisiana. I want to show you what those look like. So this particular picture posted by Freightman Ken posted, this is just fantastic. I mean, look at the edge on this. In fact, here's a better view of it, and there's his Twitter handle. Look at that. That's in Louisiana, just cutting right there. So I thought you might want to see just something kind of neat here from space. As we get into it today, though, the mess that is moving through the middle part of the country is slowly pulling on off to the north and east. And we had early this morning some dense fog issues going on over here in parts of the Carolinas getting to Virginia. And after this system pulls through, it will be bringing in some pretty windy conditions to blow around some of the snow. So just to give you the snowfall totals, now this is through 6 a.m. Central Time this morning. So of course the totals are not going to be representative over here, but you can see that this system, I think, especially the second wave that came through, really outperformed a lot of our predictions, especially over here toward the Black Hills. Some places picked up several. I mean, we're well over 18 inches in some locations. I saw some reports of 30 inches in parts of the Black Hills, and even sneaking through parts of Nebraska and into this part of Kansas, we saw some very heavy snowfall here. In fact, just north of where I was yesterday in Wichita, some local reports of up to 9 inches. So this second wave that pulled through really outperformed. We also saw this. Remember, we discussed in Monday's video that where we initially thought the heavy snow was going to be would continue to push toward the south and east, and that certainly played out quite well when looking here at how the European model was trending. So again, European model possibly doing the best with this system here, given we had two separate waves that were kind of decoupled from one another. Now, certainly on the back side of this, much of this section of the United States getting all the way into the Gulf is going to be dealing with some very, very windy conditions today. We do have some strong winds coming off the high plains as well into parts of Wyoming and Montana and Idaho. But yesterday we saw some extremely windy conditions on Santa Ana Flow. That's where the winds are coming from this direction over the mountains here in parts of Southern California. Saw some reports from the National Weather Service office out of San Diego of wind speeds hitting 60 to some locations over 100 miles an hour at the highest peaks. We're still seeing that again today. But the colder air coming in on the backside of the system, blowing some of this snow around here. Okay, where are we going with it? Well, you can watch here over the next 60 hours or so that system lifting off to the north and east. This is going to be a rainfall event along the coast, but as you get up here into the interior, potentially picking up quite a bit of snowfall. Behind it, got a little clipper that's coming in on the backside of the broader trough. You can watch it again, sneaking right in through here out of Montana. There it is, into South Dakota, Nebraska, cutting in down here, pushing through Missouri, all the way over toward the Appalachian Mountains. So that is the system sneaking through Thursday, Friday time period, really into Friday and through here, bringing in some more light snow on the cooler air that's on the back side of that. But we'll be addressing that a whole lot more in our near-term forecast that'll come out tomorrow morning. What I want to show you is what's going on with the overall pattern. Now, certainly after this passes through, yeah, we got a pretty big shot at colder air that's going to stick around here for a few days. This just looking out here at temperature differences through Thursday morning. So, yep, cold air pulling in behind this. But look at the rebound that's already happening in the Canadian prairies and out west, such that by the time we get out to next Tuesday, we've now got ourselves back into a pattern where big warm-up is happening here, pulling moisture and also pulling in some warm temperatures out of the Gulf of Mexico. So you know that whenever we see this big rebounding of heat here, this is early in March, that there must be a deep system that's pulling through the mid part of the country, and we've got to talk about that one. So let's get right to it. This particular map is valid late in the night on Monday night, next Monday night. early Tuesday morning. Now, key features to watch in this video. One will be the position of this ridge in the north part of the Pacific, butting in there into the Gulf of Alaska. Second, we'll keep our main cold anchors here over the Arctic north of Alaska and also here in the North Atlantic. But you can see that there's actually two separate waves, one coming here and a second one coming here that'll be sweeping quickly through the midsection of the United States over toward the East Coast. This will keep us on our next 10 days on a relatively wild ride with temperatures. Big warm-ups followed by brief cool downs and more warm-ups following that. But I'm particularly concerned about this map because of this. So I went out here and I looked at next Tuesday. That wave, which we saw sitting off the Baja, is forecast to sweep very quickly into Texas, with the broader wave still sitting to the north here in the Canadian prairies, stretching into like Montana, Idaho. Now, what's got me very concerned about this wave for early next week, so we're watching out here Monday night into Tuesday and even into Wednesday. If this wave comes through, well, the winds in the upper levels are going to be quite fast as the wave ejects here out of Texas into Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. With a strong westerly or southwesterly wind in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, I then went down to the closer to the surface, about a mile above our heads. I'm going to circle it for you. Can you see these bright reds in here? This indicates that out ahead of that wave, a very, very strong low-level jet. And that strong low-level jet, well, we've got to start switching our thinking now to what happens whenever we get these waves moving through the mid part of the country as we emerge into spring, because now the discussion becomes about severe weather. And so what I see here is an upper-level wind out of the southwest, pretty strong, wind about a mile above our heads here, screaming out of the south-southwest, maybe upwards of 50 to 70 miles an hour. That's going to draw in unstable air, so we see that we have a big push of Kate moving in at this point. It's not going to take much, but I'm concerned on that surface return of moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico that we could be looking at early next week, a multi-day severe weather event that could target part of the southern plains moving over to the lower Mississippi River Valley. Now, it's still several days out. This is 6 days away. I want everybody to be watching this very, very carefully, because this could be a situation that could certainly raise some alarm bells here about the potential for a big severe weather outbreak, maybe even a multi-day outbreak. I just want you to watch it with me. I'll update you again tomorrow on what the prospects of this system is going to be. I'll say this though, right now there's great ensemble support for the development of low pressure here in the panhandles before kind of hooking a bit to the south and racing on up toward the Ohio Valley. So when I start to see that it's not only just a single operational run, but the ensembles are picking up on the development of that low, that must mean that trough that's sneaking through here must be quite robust in its position in the ensembles as well. So we need to watch it very, very carefully, because as this comes out Tuesday into Wednesday, I'm concerned. Look at how tightly packed these isobars are. That's really bringing in a strong southerly wind, plenty of moisture. Our flooding concern already in this area remains. And like I said, I'm targeting right now this region. I'll just kind of hatch it out here for you as the potential region for early next week to have a severe weather outbreak. So we're going to keep a close eye on it. It is certainly the right kind of setup with a deeper trough coming in through here, high pressure sitting off of the east coast, pumping in that moisture, unstable air, great wind shear. We could have an early season outbreak here that we're going to keep an eye on, all right? A lot can evolve and change, but I want you to be watching it with me. Now let's get into the long range. What I've now got you looking at here is the time period of March 2nd through March 9th. And we see that is going to keep, with that trough that's building in here, that is going to keep this section of the United States seeing repeated low pressure systems. And that's why we see the much above average precipitation forecast for that area. The questions we need to get into in this longer range discussion is there any change happening here or here that needs to be understood? Remember, if there's going to be change in either of those two areas, the regions to be watching here are the North Pacific around Alaska and also for any changes over Greenland. So that's a narrative we've carried throughout this entire winter and early spring. Let's keep talking about it here. Getting us out to day 10, I'm going to keep a close eye on what's happening with this ridge. That's what I want you all to be focusing on, is that ridge. And does it stay in place? Does it move east or does it move west? That's going to be the trickiest part of this upcoming forecast. Because because we can see here, looking at days 5 through 10, that after the wave of cold comes through, we'd get a rebound in temperatures across the eastern part of the United States, but we'll see that wave of colder air back off pretty quickly because another wave slides through, and as we look out here into the day 10 through 15, look again, it pushes on through here, so the cold air sweeps in through this direction, and the temperatures rebound again as the whole pattern gets reestablished. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is there's not a lot in the works to slow this pattern down. No major blocking features to be discussing. So this is where we get. This is the most important part of this long-range forecast. Those pieces I've been telling you about, our ridge was here. We see that as we get out here to about March 10th and 11th, that it's forecast to slide back over this part of the Aleutian Islands. That's the first piece. Secondly, we keep the coldest anchors in place. So what this does is this allows for troughing to develop right into this area. And that is much different than what we've seen throughout much of this winter for the West Coast. Okay? We've been seeing big blocking ridges in this area, and it seems as though we've broken that pattern down. What does this do for the eastern two-thirds of the country? It is certainly going to relax the pattern, keeping sustained cold air away. Brief shots of it, but no long-duration cold. That's been a narrative of everything since January 1st. But if ridging occurs in this area at this point in the year, this is not a block. This doesn't bring in excessive heat. This brings in Gulf moisture. That's what that pattern does. And if the trough still sits back here to the west, that changes the precipitation pattern along the west coast, but also excites a lot of waves to come sweeping across the United States to tap into that Gulf moisture. So let's bring this idea, whole idea together. I'm going to show you this. Now this comes from an analog approach, but looking out here pretty far into the forecast, we're out here around the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th of the month, we see two things happening. We start to see that the analogs are increasing precipitation for the western part of the United States and also keeping things on the wetter side here in the east. So this tells me that the global pattern is setting up to keep active systems moving across the United States. Now, what's important about this is twofold. One, we already know about the moisture struggles we're dealing with here, a huge section of the United States with excess soil moisture at this point of the year. We've been discussing this many times. This is what's really got us concerned about an elevated threat for spring flooding. We know that things have been very, very dry in parts of California, as they have also been down here in southern Texas. The question is, does this pattern change affect that at all? Because as I show you March 11th, through March 18th, the European model has been pretty consistent in advertising a shift of that ridge in this direction, allowing for the trough to basically be doing something like this. And if the subtropical jet stream keeps coming up to support it, like you saw at the very beginning of this video, that keeps this area very active and wet. This keeps much of the Intermountain West on the cooler side of things and therefore snowy along that corridor. But we could finally start to get a pattern that returns moisture to parts of Oregon and California. This is the first time in a long time we've started to see our longer range models advertise wetter than average conditions for California and Southern Oregon. This pattern here, if it persists, will cause major problems for spring as well. But the question is, does it persist? There is nothing about this pattern that tells me to tell you that any section of the United States will be going into a sustained drier time period as we get into the month of March. So what we need to talk about is what could make this forecast fail. If any component of the list of 7 things that I have listed here changes, flips sign, weakens, or strengthens, this pattern is very delicate and could get broken. The most important thing is going to be that ridge here, because we notice that through mid-March it wants to hang out over the Aleutian Islands, not parked up against the west coast of the United States. Secondly, what's helping with that is the deep trough that's sitting over the Arctic. I'm talking about this one right here. And I still have yet to see major changes in the North Atlantic changing up the pattern there. If either of those two things change, that will be critical to allowing this pattern to evolve the way it does. We're going to talk in a few moments about what global winds are doing, but in order for it to maintain what it's currently forecast to do, I need to see the global winds remaining high. The tropics are really giving us a lack of a signal. What I mean by that is MJO has been hanging out very close to null phase. It's switched directions, hoping to come back out now into phase 4, 5, and 6. That's supportive of more warmth here across the eastern two-thirds of North America. We don't have an El Nino or La Nina signal in the Southern Oscillation Index, which would tell us that. It's just barely negative right now. And one other thing, that polar vortex has been strong and its forecast remains strong. Let's go MJO first. We have seen throughout much of this winter, since the beginning of January, I'll trace it out for you. The MJOs emerged over here in early January, phase 4, 5, and 6, and then stayed here through February, come right back over to this point, and then move like as if it was going to go over to phase 8 here recently. But the latest forecast plume brings it back into this side of the diagram. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, phase 5, for example, tends to keep the colder air in Alaska running across the United States in that trajectory when it does. It keeps much of the rest of the lower 48 in, well, we know what are the warmer phases over here of the MJO. So we've resisted letting the tropics bring us over into the really cold sustained pattern. That's why I told you a few moments ago that if the tropics are aiding in this at all, it's such that we're keeping much of the lower 48 away from sustained cold. What about what's going on in the Arctic and above the Arctic in the top of the troposphere and base of the stratosphere? Well, our Arctic oscillation since the beginning of the new year has been, I shouldn't draw that in blue, it has been quite positive, which is a signal of keeping more warmer conditions. Over the next 15 days, the AO is expected to stay quite strong, and that is a reflection of the strength of the polar vortex. And my story here with the polar vortex has been a pretty consistent one. Where it currently sits, remember, this is the strength of the polar vortex, if you want to think of it that way. There's actually zonal winds here. It's sitting way up here. We are almost to the point that a disruption in the polar vortex, given the shift north in the jet stream, given the lengthening of the daylight hours, given the normal progression towards spring, that any sort of sudden stratospheric warming or disruption in the polar vortex, well, it's run out of time to cause major disruption in our weather pattern. We're just too far into the season for this to be a major factor. So that's another bit of supportive evidence that I think we stay on the brief shots of cooler air, nothing sustained. Here's probably the more important thing we need to be discussing in this longer range forecast. Going back over the last 5 months, back to October, we've kind of seen this systematic increase in our global winds. They peaked back in mid-January, and they've since come back up high again. Now, the question becomes, as we get into spring, is this going to continue to go up in this direction and maintain, more often than not, higher than normal global winds? Because if it does, it will be just like last spring. And one of the things that's correlated with above average global winds are unblocked weather systems, which means frequent passages of low pressure. That means active weather. That means a lot of precipitation. And you saw the soil moisture anomaly map a few moments ago. That's not a good thing. Or do our global winds, by the time we get into April, kind of come back down again? If that occurs, in other words, if this does something like this with time, then that would be a signal toward a more blocked weather pattern and could potentially open up planting windows in the midsection of the country. This right here, I'll put an exclamation point on it, is something we got to be paying very close attention to with time. Very close attention to. I'll keep you updated in every forecast video. But keeping things the way they are, with that ridge backing up here, what we end up getting is a flow pattern that does this, strong subtropical branch underneath it. So we're going to keep this area wet, possibly increase throughout the month of March into early April our precipitation amounts in the west. This could build up more snowpack in the Intermountain West. And if I could say that there's one thing that I think the model has biased wrong, it's in the dryness you see in the midsection of the country. With that pattern setting up that way, I do not think that we are drier than normal in the midsection of the United States, okay? Here's something else to think about. With the pattern doing that, okay, again, we'll just draw it over here. Yes, I agree that there's a better chance of not being above average in temperature over the southeast, but the cooler weather that we see in here is something we've got to really start to pay attention to. The reason why is I think this is mainly due to sensible cooling due to the snowpack, and that's what I'm researching this week because, take a look at this. Our current snowpack issues right now, we're much above average in through here. Okay, a lot of numbers over 100%. So there are, on some of our peaks in the west, a lot of extra snow. We could be helping out the Sierra Nevada as we get into the second week of March here as that flow pattern changes, and that is much, much, much needed precipitation in this area. What I'll be researching is if we maintain above average snowpack in this area through the end of winter, does that lend toward more troughing in the west, ridging over the southeast, and a very active spring weather pattern? Increased severe weather, more precipitation. We need to know an answer to that because this is certainly a large area over which we've got a lot of snowpack. I'll be looking into it and I'm going to report back to you what I find, okay? But from here, what I want to do to finish this up is I want to talk about the long range for South America. Pause the video, take a look at some of the stats here. Here's the big news. 35% of the soybeans in all of Brazil have been harvested, but Mato Grosso is really making some progress. 73% harvested, 80% of their safrinha corn has been planted. Now, there's some concern about that safrinha corn across the rest of Brazil. Specifically, there's normally a hard stop date around March 10th, where if they don't get it in, they won't plant it because of the worries of things drying out. There is some reports right now that about half of the safrinha corn will be planted after the ideal window closes, which is right about now. Now, when we look out over the next 10 days, we can see that this corridor by the European model has been kept wet. And Mato Grosso, which you can see the statistics for, is this state right in through here. Now, if we keep Brazil's eastern and central and northern growing regions wet over the next 10 days, we could start seeing more of a delay in what's left to be planted of the safrinha crop. The other part of this I want you to look at is what's going on in Argentina. We reported earlier this week that the models had been forecasting this region dry. We see that the latest updates are continuing to keep it dry. And what this might do is this might impact some of the crop that's maturing right now, filling pods in the reproductive stages for corn. This drier weather could be critical for some of the numbers we're currently hearing as to what's supposed to be coming out of Argentina. And to keep this on the longer term theme, I want to show you, I've now seen 4 separate model runs for basically the month of March into early April that have continued to keep this area very, very wet in Brazil, but there's pockets of dryness that are happening in these regions and down here in Argentina. Now, I don't trust the long-range forecast from any model right now for South America. And the reason why is we do not have strong signals coming out of the tropics to suggest that we're changing up the flow pattern for the Brazilian monsoon. I just don't see strong enough signals to tell me that I should be confident in these forecasts, okay? I want to watch it week by week. That's why we report on why we report on South America so frequently. But let's just keep on it together, okay? With that, I want to end this technical discussion. I want to wish you all have a great week, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you.